So then let's move on to what I'm going to call now the counterintuitive approach to conflict resolution. And that is back to the situation where you're trying to help maybe a brother or sister that are in conflict and they can't seem to get it worked out. And you've even tried the Matthew 18 approach, but it's not a sin against the church. It's not something that's going to need to rise to the level of the church leadership being involved. It's just that they've been hurt. Something has happened to them by someone else. Or maybe it's two families, one family against another. And the hurts are so deep that it's really causing them to be out of fellowship with each other. Now, as I mentioned last night, a lot of times our approach is to kind of have that dramatic courtroom sort of drama, like we see on television, right? And everybody kind of gets their case put together, and we get everybody together in a room, and we expose the evidence and what's going on, and there's supposed to be some sort of verdict that's reached, right? That's kind of the standard approach. What I'm suggesting to you tonight is, first of all, that doesn't work very well, especially in the kingdom. You know, it's just not a good biblical model to follow. But second of all, based on what we shared last night, what we're really trying to do is not just get the evidence presented on each side, but instead we're trying to get down to people's hearts and really what's going on the inside. So what I'm bringing to you now is the counterintuitive approach, where we're actually going to kind of flip the whole thing upside down and do the opposite of what we would normally think to do. Now, first of all, here's the steps. Identify the problem. Okay? Once again, you know what the sin is. There's been hurt. There's been resentment. There's been bitterness. Something has happened. Somebody's really agonizing over somebody else, or they can't forgive. They can't let something go. You identify the problem. It's not a small issue. It's grown to the point where it's not just a character difference or a personality quirk or anything like this. This is deep-seated and causing a real problem. Second of all, you do need to put a team together that usually is trusted by both sides. If it's a situation between two individuals, then sometimes it can be just another two individuals that are helping out. You know, for example, my wife and I may help out with two couples that are at odds with each other in the fellowship. So we put a team together. Sometimes in bigger situations, especially maybe between churches, which is sometimes what I get involved in, you put together what we call a task force. You put together maybe 4 or 5 or 6 men and women that can approach this from different angles and gather information. Okay, so they're gathering information. We're hearing out each side and what the issue is and why they're hurt, what the sin has been, what needs to be repented of, what the feelings are. All that information is gathered together. And then the independent couples or individuals that are helping out, then they kind of sort through the information. And once again, they're trying to drill down. Let's figure out what the heart of the issue is. Why is this person so upset? Or why do they seem stuck on this issue? And maybe you begin to get a little bit of a glimpse of they had an abusive background. Or maybe bad relationships with their parents. Or maybe something happened to them when they were first baptized in the church by maybe a leader that was harsh or something like that. But you start to get bits and pieces that help you to understand the people that are involved. You know what I mean? That you get more than just what's on the surface, but what may be driving some of their pain and some of their anger. You identify what those issues are. So, you've got the information, you've got your team together, you've drilled down, you're gathering heart issues, but then here's where it gets different. What you then do, you've got both sides and their positions. You begin to work with those two sides independently and simply say, what I would like you to do is write a 1-page statement on your responsibility and what you've done to make the situation difficult the way that it is. What do you own? What do you take on as what you did wrong to make the situation as bad as it is? Do you see what I'm saying? Almost every time you start there, the side will say, but I didn't do anything wrong. It's the other guys. Right? It's their fault. They're the one that hurt me. They're the one that did this, that, or the other. And you've got to go, no, I bet you there's at least something that you could have done different. I bet you there's something that you said or a certain way that you felt or a time that you reacted. So let's think about that for a minute. And they may go, okay, well, yeah, there was that time where we met in the hallway and I lost my temper. Okay. Why did you lose your temper? Well, this, that, and the other. Okay, but let's talk about that. Is it good to lose your temper? No. How do you think they felt when you lost your temper, especially when you did it in front of all those other people? Well, that's a good point. I hadn't really thought about that, and that was probably embarrassing for them. Or someone says, yeah, I said some pretty strong words. I used some really hurtful speech one time when we were talking about that. How do you think that made them feel? Yeah, that probably hurt them. Was it wrong for you to do that? Yeah. Okay, let's start writing. Let's start putting together a 1-page, not 5 pages, not a book, but let's start writing 1 page out of what you could have done different and what your fault is in the situation. See, what you're trying to do is not develop sympathy for the other side, but you're actually trying to develop empathy. Okay? Sympathy are feelings of pity or sorrow for someone else's situation. Empathy, though, is the ability to understand and share the feelings of another. You're really trying to get that one side to get empathetic and begin to identify what the other side is going through. You know, it's not easy. And, you know, we don't like to identify with somebody else, especially if they've hurt us. We don't like to try and imagine what they might have felt. We don't want to have to understand their side of it. We just want to hang on to our side and be right. But see, for disciples, for Christians, we need to be like Christ and have the heart that says, no, I care about how you feel. I care about what you're going through. I care about what's happening with your heart on the inside. Romans chapter 12, verse 14, we're encouraged to weep with those who weep. That's a hard teaching, especially if you've been hurt and especially if you're angry. But the goal is to get them to start writing this 1-page letter. And I would say, usually I'd say, take a week. Okay? It's Friday night. Let's get together next Friday night. And I want you to bring me just 1 page of what you did that maybe hurt them and just how you feel about what happened to them. So we give it a week. We get back together. They give me their letter. Usually it's a page, sometimes not quite a page. And I read it, and I say, you know, you've really done some good work here. You know, I think you articulated a few things, and you identified some things that may have hurt them, but I bet you can do better. They don't like that. They don't want another homework assignment. But really, it's rare for me to take it on the first run. People need to learn how to drill down even deeper. You know, I think you're starting to feel and see what they've gone through. But I don't think you're there yet. So here, I'm going to give it back to you. Let's take another week. And this time I really want you to pour into it. And don't worry about being too expressive. Go ahead and put your heart out there. Begin to understand. You know, and keep it focused on you. I will say that sometimes people try to slip in a backhanded comment. They'll say something like, well, I just want you to know that I forgive you for this. Now that sounds good, except what you're really saying is, it's still your fault. You know, they're not focusing on themselves anymore. They're focusing on the other person and and you've got to weed out those sort of statements. They're trying to skirt around the issue and not make it about them, and it's not about having empathy for the other person. Instead, they want to blame the other person. You got to get those statements out of there. So you're doing revisions, and sometimes it's the second or maybe even the third revision where then you go, okay, we're there. Now, while you're doing that with one side, someone else is doing that with the other side. And it's the same sort of process. That they try it first time, well, that's good start, but you can do better. Let's rewrite. Let's do it again. And so really what you're doing is getting them to drill down to the point where a lot of emotions are going onto one piece of paper. Then after both sides have completed that, you set up a time to get both sides together. And you pick a neutral ground. It's probably not in either one of their homes. You invite the other people that have been involved. Everybody comes together. Everybody's a little nervous about how this is going to go because there's been tears and anger and feelings all the way up until this point. I usually lead that meeting and start off by saying, let's put some ground rules out here. We're going to take a step forward. We're going to begin to see God do some amazing things in terms of reconciling this situation. But we're not going backwards tonight. We're not going to lose ground in this meeting. And I take a firm stand on controlling the meeting. I'd say, we're going to simply read these statements, and I ask you to stick to what you've written. We don't let people go off script. We don't let them ad-lib. We don't let them go kind of off on tangents. No, it's a matter of reading what's been stated. And I say if it gets off or we start to get upset, we're going to stop the meeting, and we'll try again another time. So there's a lot of control that comes over it, but it really does begin to set the pattern. And I will tell you that in just about every time that we've done this, the transformation has been amazing. That men and women that were at odds with each other and so angry and so upset, when that other side read their letter that exposed their empathy, that said, I do understand how this hurts you. I do see that by what I did, it tore you down, or it made you feel bad, or that hurt your family, or when they start pouring those things out, it changes everything. And then the other side reads their letter, and it's equally as compassionate and empathetic. It really, really moves the group. It really changes things. And so usually after the reading of the letters, we take just a few minutes, but often there's tears, there's embracing, there's a willingness to begin to move ahead, a willingness to let go of the issues and see things kind of left in the background that were big issues before. That's a different sort of approach. That's counterintuitive. That's not the way the world thinks. They want to hammer it out and prove who's right and who's wrong. But as Christians, when we really begin to identify with someone else's pain and expose our heart, it makes a huge difference, and it lowers the temperature and makes progress. Now, just to wrap this part up, we usually, after this meeting, give it about 1 or 2 weeks to make sure that things stay on track emotionally. We don't try to do too much with that one meeting. We don't let it, even if it goes well, we just stick to the reading and maybe some hugs and some prayers. I may read a scripture or two, and then we say, okay, we've come to this point. Let's stop here and take a couple of weeks and just let things die down. Let's just continue in this positive sort of mindset and rebuilding a very fragile relationship. But then after 2 or 3 weeks, I usually try to have another final meeting to say, okay, now that the relationship is being restored, let's talk about 1 or 2 practical things that got us off track before so that we don't get back there again. And we have a practical meeting, but by that time, a lot has been healed. There's a lot of positive energy being displayed in the relationship, and we can move ahead. So I wanted to put that out to you just so you know that this is a different sort of process. This is a way to get people to really reconcile and move ahead. And I found it to be very, very effective. I'm going to invite Kim up now, and she can share some.
It is totally amazing to see this process work. The number one hindrance to it is, and Walter mentioned on it, is shame. Shame's something that we all feel, and it happens in our life. Just like we have conflict in our lives, all of us, we all experience shame. Even if it's something as simple as today, I was at the store trying to buy some gifts for our grandchildren. You hand the credit card to the person there and it's declined. The person behind you in line sighs. What do you feel? Shame. You pull out another one, you're like, try this. And I want to then explain, I called the credit card company that I was going to be in India and this was going to be okay. But that's just, shame just happens. And what you're trying to keep out of these meetings, these times together, is shame. Because you think about the result of shame or judgment. When we give judgment or we feel judgment, we either shut down and we don't want to talk, or we get very angry. And we have to, even in leading the meeting, maybe you're dealing with your own conflict in situations. If you're leading it, it's so important that we give empathy. What kills shame and judgment is empathy. It just makes it disappear. And again, Walter commented on the difference between sympathy and empathy. I'll give you an example. A neighbor has a death in their family. You take them, you drop off a card and flowers. I actually used to feel really good about that because I at least made the effort for the card and the flowers. That's sympathy. The truth is sympathy, it doesn't do a whole lot. Empathy is when we connect with the person. I'm so sorry for your loss. We actually feel for the person. Jesus, when he went with Mary and Martha to raise Lazarus from the dead, he wept. He felt the pain that they felt, even though he knew he was going to raise him from the dead. If I was going to someone's house and they had a loss, and I knew that I could raise them from the dead, I'd be like, it's okay, stop crying, it's okay. But that's not what Jesus did. Jesus connected on an emotional level. And some people will say, if you haven't experienced it, we can't have empathy. But it's not true. I just lost my father a few months ago. Many people connected with me that had never lost a parent. It's hard. But what happens when we're in these discussions, whether it's our own conflict or we're helping people with their conflict, we have to make sure in the room that I personally am being empathetic with both sides and that I'm not communicating any sort of judgment or shame for them. But if you pick up on the person beginning to shut down, you can watch. When people shut down, you see it. Walter will say to me, when he and I are in conflict, he'll say to me, I can see you've just shut down. And if I'm honest, I'll be like, yep, I did. I don't want to talk anymore. That's when something has been said or something's done that a wall comes up. But again, what takes that wall away is when we're empathetic. And as Walter's saying, when he leads these meetings, the ability to say, time out, stop right here. We've got to stop for a moment. Or when we see one person, again, the nonverbal, when one person rolls their eyes when someone says something. Or we say, stop, we can't do that. Or that's not what they intended, that we connect on those levels. We've got to allow ourselves to emotionally get involved, and that's hard. And see the pain. You can, with a conflict situation, you can feel the pain for both sides. And we've got to allow ourselves to get there, and we've got to help each of the sides to get there as well.
Amen. Thank you, Kim. And Kim is really a great role model for me in terms of how to connect emotionally with people. Kim as anybody that knows Kim can cry almost at the drop of a hat. Everything seems to get her to choke up. And, I used to think, gee, she's crying over coffee, there's nothing here. Why are you so upset? But the other side of that is that endears people to her. Jesus said to the woman, or said to Mary actually at the tomb, don't cry. Some of us are too stoic or too stiff, and I can be that way. And that may be just how you are as a person, but let me urge you as a leader to continue to work on connecting emotionally. Prior to the final meeting, when you're still doing the investigation about what the conflict is, the side that you're investigating, when you say something as simple as, wow, that must have been really hard for you. I'm really sorry. That speaks volumes to that person. They just needed somebody to say, that must really hurt. Wow, I'm so sorry. Tell me some more about how that made you feel. Oh, that's music to their ears. They just dropped all the walls. They're ready to tell you the story. You're going to get so much information that's going to help you bring them to the point of reconciliation. But it's having that kind of heart, that willingness. We're not just being this stoic judge sitting on the bench pronouncing a verdict. We're really trying to get down to their hearts and get them to understand. So that's the process that we wanted to present to you tonight. It's not the only process. It's not a perfect process. And it's going to take practice on your parts. But I find that with disciples, it's the better process. It's the one that tends to get us through the sticky situations that need to get worked out within our churches.